Okay, so today we continue our study of the Dhammapada. Today into the appamāda ranga. Appamāda means heedfulness or vigilance, as I said. It's the opposite of pamāda, which means negligence or heedlessness. So, the first story is based on 3 verses, which go as follows. Appamādo amatapadaṁ, pamādo maccuno padaṁ, appamattā mīyanti, ye pamattā yathā matā, evaṁ visesato ñatvā, appamādamhi paṇḍitā, appamāde pamodanti, ariyānaṁ gocare ratā, te jhāyino sātatikā, niccaṁ daḻhaparakkamā, phusanti dhīrā nibbānaṁ yogakkemaṁ anuttaraṁ. 3 verses. So the first verse, appamādo amatapadaṁ, negligence or heedlessness is the path. Vigilance is the path to the deathless, amatapadaṁ, to immortality. Heedlessness or negligence is the path to death. The one who is vigilant never dies, not mīyanti. Whoever is negligent is as if already dead. Evaṁ visesato ñatvā, knowing the difference, or knowing the difference between these two. The wise set themselves in heedfulness. Appamāde pamodanti, they rejoice greatly in heedfulness. Ariyānaṁ gocare ratā, delighting in the pasture or the resort of the noble ones. Jhāyino sātatikā, they meditate constantly or continuously. Niccaṁ daḻhaparakkamā, establishing themselves in effort, permanently in effort or constantly in effort. Phusanti dhīrā nibbānaṁ, these wise ones touch or reach nibbana, freedom, which is nibbana, which is the yogakkemaṁ, the safety, anuttaraṁ, the highest safety from bondage. So, okay, let's explain them. I'll try to explain them simply. The first one, the path. Heedfulness is the path heedfulness is the path to immortality. Heedlessness is the path to death. The one who is heedful never dies. The one who is those who are heedless are as if already dead. Seeing the difference here, the wise will set themselves in heedfulness. They delight in heedfulness, and therefore they delight in the refuge of the noble ones. They meditate constantly and put out effort constantly, and therefore they touch nibbana, which is the supreme safety from bondage. So being safe from getting trapped or falling into suffering. So what were these 3 verses? These 3 verses were said in relation to the story of Samavati, who was a queen in the time of the Buddha. And the story here is actually incredibly long, because it tries to tell the stories of just about every character involved, which takes quite some time. I'm going to try to limit it to hopefully just two people, the protagonist and the antagonist in the story. Protagonist is the queen Samavati, and the antagonist is the queen Magandiya. They were queens of the same king. And how it came about, Samavati was born into the family of a banker in one city. And it happened that there was a great plague in their country, and as a result, she and her parents escaped, had to run away from the city and leave behind all their belongings. But they had a friend. They were friends with Gosaka Seti, who actually there's a big story about him, but he's not really important, so we're going to skip it. The important thing is that he lived in this other city, the city of King Udena, who we're also not going to tell the story. But Samavati and her parents went to this city looking for the Gosaka Seti, because since they were friends of Gosaka, the banker, they thought for sure he would take care of them and look after them and help them out in this difficult time. So it was very difficult on the travel, and they were very much worn out and famished by the time they got to the city of King Udena. And what they did is they found out that Gosaka Seti had set up these almshouses where they could get free food from. So they thought, well, what we'll do is we'll stay here, and they stayed in this rest house. For travelers, it's just an empty place for people to rest, and send Samavati to get food for the three of them. So she went to Gosaka Gosaka the banker's house, and found this man. I can't remember this man who distributes the food to the beggars and to people who have no work and no food. And they said, how much, Mita was his name. They said, how much food would you like? How many portions? And she said, I'd like 3 portions. And he looked at her, this little girl, and so he gave her 3 portions. And she took them back to her parents. And out of respect, of course in India, it was the respect was always given to the man, so out of respect, they encouraged him to eat first. I mean, also, whatever, that's the way it was. But as luck would have it, because they had him eat first, and he was so famished, he ate he ate the best food and got sick, and actually passed away that night, because the food was too rich and because he hadn't eaten for such a long time. He gorged himself, and that was pretty upsetting for the two of them. It was like now their husband, the man of the family who would have supported them in that culture. It would have been very difficult for these two women to get along, and of course this was their loved husband and father. So, but the mother anyway said had Samavati go to get food the next day, and the same thing, asked how many portions, and today she said she wants 2 portions. And so he gave her 2 portions, and she brought them back, and this time she had her mother eat first, and same thing happened to her mother. Her mother got sick and died. So I don't know whether there was some problem with the food or not, but it sounds like it was just because they were gorging themselves. And so Samavati was now alone, an orphan in the world, and very, very distressed. And you have to think also she was born in a good family. Her parents were the head bankers in their country. And so she was a very high-bred and, of course, not used to things like begging. So she went back the next day to get 1 portion, and they asked her how many portions. She said 1 portion. And this man, Mita, got very, very angry at her and called her all sorts of names, like, you vile woman, don't know what's wrong with you. And she was just shocked. She had never heard such terrible words in her life, and she never thought anyone could ever be called such a thing. And she was mortified and asked, what did I do wrong? And she said, and he said, first day you have 3 portions, you greedy pig, and then you realize it's too much, so you only have 2, and now finally you've realized how much is enough, so you're only taking 1 portion. And she started crying, and she said, that's not why I took 3 portions. And she explained what had happened, and that she had come actually to see their friend Gosaka Seti, whose almshouse it was. And this man Mita he started crying as well, and he was so sad for Samavati, and so he said, from now on you will be my daughter, and he took her in as his daughter. Now this story is you see, it's a very long story, but this part is important only because it tells us where Samavati comes from, and also gives us her name, because her name at that time was Sama. And what she did, they had this almshouse, and everyone would just rush in to get the food. All these people, the supplicants, coming in, just rush in to get their food. And Dhammapada heard this great noise, and she said to her father, "Isn't there some way you can stop?" Or this man who had taken her in, "Isn't there something you could do?" And he said, "Oh, there's no way to stop it." And so she said, "Well, why not build a fence and have them come in from one door and out the other door, so 2 entrances, and then they can just come in one by one and get their food, and there'll be no jostling and no shouting." And so he did that, and then it was totally quiet from then on. So she became known as Sama of the Fence, and it was Sama's fence. Fence means Vati, which gave her the name Samavati. Now, the other part of the story is that Gosaka liked to hear this noise. He heard this noise and he always thought, "Oh, that's my almshouse where they're giving away free food," and he felt really good about that. And all of a sudden there was no noise, and it kind of bothered him. And so he asked, where did the noise go? And he said, "Oh, my daughter devised some clever plan for this fence." And Gosaka said, "You have a daughter? I didn't know that." And he said, "Well, actually," and then he realized that, he said, "Actually, this is the daughter of your friend, the other saintee, the other banker." And Gosaka was shocked, and so he took her as his own daughter. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And took her as his own daughter, and raised her as a high-bred woman again. Now then it happened that she was going bathing one day, and King Udena saw her coming by the palace and asked for her hand, fell in love with her and thought she would make a good queen, and asked her to become his queen. And there was a big fight about it, and she gave in. Kings in that time were not to be denied. So the parents tried to say no, and they were almost thrown out of their house. And finally Samavati said, no, you don't say no to kings, I will go. And so she went and became the queen. That's the story of Samavati, how she became queen. The story of Magandiya, in brief, was a little more interesting. The Buddha found out about Magandiya and her parents because he realized the parents were ready to become enlightened. They were highly developed individuals. And so he went one day on alms round. And the story goes that Magandiya was probably Magandiya is the bad guy in this story, so she was probably a fairly proud and cruel and wicked sort of person. So very hard to find a husband for, very picky. And it said that the parents were also picky, so the father would never accept anybody for her daughter. So she was probably spoiled as well, because he only wanted the best for his daughter. And so they denied all these suitors who came and tried to take her as their wife, until finally they saw the Buddha, and he saw the Buddha standing there, and he said, "This is the man for my daughter." Uh-oh. And there is no man in India like this one. This has to be the one for my daughter. And so he rushed back home and told his family and told his wife, and everyone was like, "Wow, this must be something." And then they wanted to see this guy. So they all went out, and suddenly there was no Buddha. The Buddha had gone. He'd asked the Buddha, he said, stay here, I want you to meet my daughter." So he brought his wife and daughter. The Buddha was gone. And so they're looking around for him, and then they saw on the ground his footprint. He had intentionally put a footprint there, because the thing in India is that they knew how to read palms and they knew how to read feet. So they looked at this footprint, and the wife, Magandiya, the woman, the mother, knew right away that this wasn't the one for her daughter. She said, this guy's enlightened. This guy has no more lust in him. Why? Because you can tell by the footprint, if you're very clever. She said, if a person is angry, then the heel will go down heavy. Right? When people stomp because they're angry, a person with anger. A person with lots of greed will step on the tiptoes because they're always hurrying towards something. And a person with delusion will not have an even footprint because they're wobbling all over the place. But this is a perfectly pure individual who puts this footprint down. So she can apparently see that. And the man said, "Oh, be quiet, you don't know what you're talking about. You're always seeing crocodiles in water pots." That's what he said. And so he searched and searched, and he found the Buddha, and he bowed down to the Buddha, And he said, "This is my daughter, Magandiya. Please accept her as your wife. There's no one in all of India who is more worthy of her than you are." And the Buddha looked at him. And of course the Buddha had a purpose here. He was coming to teach the two parents. And so he explained to them his story of how he had left behind the kingdom in Kapilavatthu and gone forth, and for 6 years had tortured himself until finally he realized the middle way and became enlightened, and was confronted with Mara along with Mara's 3 daughters. And he talks about the 3 daughters of Mara, who of course would be the epitome of sensual attraction, Mara being the evil one, so his daughters were these. If you've ever seen the little Buddha, you know the 3 daughters. No? And he said, having seen those 3 and not given rise to any lust, any desire, having totally thrown out all lust and desire myself, what use have I for this sack of urine and feces that you present to me? I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, or I wouldn't touch it with my baby toe or something like that. And listening to this, and because of course he was teaching the Dhamma as he spoke, the 2 of them became enlightened, listening. I can't remember, maybe they became sotapanna, and then they asked permission to become monks, and then they went forth, and then they became arahants, something like that. But Magandiya, the daughter, was of course not impressed, being called a sack of crap. And she said, "One day I will know what to do with this ascetic Gotama." So she vowed revenge against him. That's how our story starts. That's the introduction of these 2. The last thing is that Magandiya was then placed into the protection of her uncle, who got the bright idea to bring her to the king, saying, "Well, if there's no one else good for him, bring her to the king." Brought her to the king, and the king fell in love with her as well, and took her as his wife as well. He had a 3rd wife, but we won't talk about her because she's not important, not for this story. Well, that's the way of kings. They have as many wives as they want, and whoever they want. Okay, so that's the beginning. Now, how did it come about that the Buddha told these 3 verses? Well, where do we start? Samavati had a slave girl, a servant. Kuduchara, I think is her name. Kuduttara, I should know her name. She's a very important person. Kujuttara, who was a bit of a hunchback and a servant. And every day the king would give Samavati 8 pieces of money for flowers, or every week or something. And Kujuttara would go out, pocket 4 of the gold coins, and buy flowers with the other 4 gold coins. And she would do this, and Samavati didn't know any better. She said, "Oh, this is 8 gold coins worth of flowers, okay." So she took 4 gold coins worth of flowers, thinking it was 8. And all the time it went like this. Now, it so happened that at that time the Buddha was staying, being patronized by the 3 bankers, one of them being Gosaka. But at any rate, the Buddha was in the area. And Kujuttara one day went out to get flowers, and it turned out that the gardener had decided to patronize, had asked permission to be able to feed the Buddha on one day. And so he got the permission, he got that day to give food to the Buddha, and part of it was to make a lot of flowers. And so he said, "Okay, I'll get you some flowers, but first I'm going to feed the Buddha." And so he went. He said, "You come with me and you sit by me." He said to this servant, Kujuttara, "Come with me, and at the end I'll give you some flowers." And so, okay, fine. Then she went in, and the Buddha saw her and knew right away that actually she had some perfection in her. And so he taught with her in mind. And at the end of his teaching, of course after he eats, then he'll give a talk. He gave the teaching, and as a result of the teaching, she became a sotapanna. She was sitting there listening and of course applying the teachings, and became a sotapanna. Now the thing about a sotapanna is they don't steal. So here she had 8 gold coins in her possession, and instructions to get 8 gold coins worth of flowers. So what did she do? She bought 8 gold coins worth of flowers. Now what happens when she brings 8 gold coins worth of flowers back to Samavati? It's twice as many as she normally comes with. So Samavati says, "What happened today? Did you get? How did you get twice as much? Did they put a special on in flowers or something? Are they on sale?" And Kudjutara said, "No, miss, no, my lady. But here's how it happened. Before I actually was stealing 4 of the gold coins. I mean, she just said it because she's enlightened. She's a sotapanna. She has no fear for herself. She had no desire to hide her. She couldn't lie either. She had seen the baseness of it, and of course felt great shame as a result. And she said, in the past I was stealing half-words of money, and she said, well then why, and what, so today you're not stealing them, what happened today? And she said, well today I heard the teaching of the Buddha, and I realized the truth of it, and so I could never steal, and I think I could never do such a terrible thing again. And Samavati was a very good person. She wasn't the kind of cruel, wicked person that we're going to see Magandiya being. So instead of saying something like, "You evil slave, give me all my money back," she said, "Can you teach me the Dhamma?" And she said, "Yeah, I can do that." And so because she was going to be their teacher, they actually put their servant up on a higher seat. First they bathed her in this rose water, and then they put her up on this higher seat, and then they listened to the Dhamma. She had called all of her ladies in waiting to come, and they all listened to the Dhamma from their servant. And from that point on, they said, "From now on you will be our teacher." And they said, "We want you to go to the Buddha constantly and receive all the teachings you can from him, and come back every time and teach us." And she did this faithfully, and as a result she became, actually the servant lady became, was able to memorize the whole of the Buddha's teaching, the whole of the Tipitaka, they say, or all of the trainings of the Buddha. And she faithfully brought them back to Samavati. Now one day Samavati wanted to be able to see the Buddha, because of course this was their teacher and they were practicing according to the Buddha's teaching, so they wanted to see, to meet with the Buddha. They said, can you do this for us? And she said, it's not easy for a queen, because the queens were totally trapped. They never saw the city. The king was so jealous that he would never let his queen out, of course. Pretty terrible, actually. But what she said, well then do this. She said, cut some holes in your walls, and in each of your rooms make a hole, and when the Buddha walks by on alms round, you'll be able to hold up your hands and pay respect to him. So they did that. Now Magandiya, at this time, she was walking around and she saw these holes, and she says, what are those for? And one of the ladies says, oh, those are so we can pay homage to the Buddha. And Magandiya right away, she said, she said, this this arch enemy of mine, my nemesis. And so Magandiya right then thought, well, I'll know it, and now I'll figure out something to do to destroy both the Buddha and this queen and her followers, who are followers of this nasty, mean ascetic. And so she tried to think. This is where she tried to think up all these ways to first. So the first thing she did is she went to the king and said, Samavati was plotting against the king and tried to turn the king against Samavati. And the king said, why do you say that? And she said, well, look, they're not even faithful to you. You see they've put these holes, and instead of coming to pay respect to you, they now are paying respect to the Buddha. And so the king went and he saw these holes and he smiled, and so instead of getting angry and upset at it, he ordered that there be windows placed there. They put some nice windows so they could be able to see the Buddha comfortably. So the king wasn't moved, and he didn't listen to Magandiya, not the first time. So she was very, very angry, and so what she did as a result of that is got together some of these other religious groups who would have been anti-Buddha, against the Buddha, and jealous of the Buddha and so on, and got them together and bribed them to set up some people to say nasty things to the Buddha, and to every time they saw the Buddha to revile the Buddha to generally make a nuisance of themselves. Which they did, and this is an important part of the story because it's an important story that we always bring up. What happened then is Ananda, the Buddha's attendant and cousin, said to the Buddha, "We should go somewhere else." The Buddha said, "Why go somewhere else?" And, "Well, these people are reviling you. I can't take it to hear them saying such nasty things about the Buddha." And the Buddha said, "Where will we go?" And he said, "Well, we'll go to some other city." And the Buddha said, "And what if they revile us there?" And Ananda said, "Well, then we'll go to another city." And the Buddha said, "And then, if they revile us there, then we'll go to And Buddha said, "Ananda, this isn't how you deal with problems. A problem that arises should be dealt with right then and there. This is the correct way." And then he used the simile of an elephant. The elephant goes, the Buddha said, "I am like the great elephant. If an elephant goes into battle, it doesn't go in there and as soon as it gets attacked by arrows and so on, it runs away. It has to deal with it. It has to stay in the battle and carry the king and so on. It has to be. It can't be afraid of these things, and it must settle it right then and there." And so how can I not suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous people and so on? And so the Buddha said, "And anyway, it's only going to last 7 days." And then indeed it did only last 7 days, because he said, no one can revile a Buddha for more than 7 days. It's too wicked, you can't do it. So eventually they just couldn't bear it anymore, they're evil, and had to give it up. So Magandia was very, very angry, and at this point it started to go to her head, and she started getting crazy ideas. So what she did next is was trying to find a way to get at Samavati. She said, "I can't get at the Buddha, but I can sure destroy Samavati. There's got to be a way." And so what she did is she knew that these Samavati and her followers were now keeping the precepts, at least the 5 precepts. And so she said to the king, or she got her relative to bring 8 live chickens as a gift to the king. And the king said, "Oh, what a nice meal that will be." And through Magandia's prompting, he asked, "Oh, who's going to cook them?" And Magandia right away said, "Oh, Samavati will cook them. Her maids are doing nothing. Send them to Samavati and her ladies-in-waiting, and they will cook them up." And so he said, "Oh, good idea." And so he sent them off to Samavati. So they brought these live chickens to Samavati and said, "Kill these and cook them and serve them to the king." And Samavati said, "We don't take life. We refuse to take the life of any being." And they brought them back, and Magandia said, see, they won't even do this for you. They have no love for you, O king. And she said, "But let them take the same 8 chickens and tell them that they're for the ascetic Gautama, for the Buddha, and I bet they'll do it." And the king didn't say anything, and kind of, okay, let's go along with it. Magandia said, "Here, take these back and tell them to cook them up and serve them to the ascetic Gautama." But what she did is she switched them with 8 dead chickens and sent them 8 dead chickens. And they said, "Oh, well, we can do this." And so they cooked them up and sent them off to the Buddha. And when the king found out, or then Magandia found out, and she told the king, and the king was kind of quiet, but at this point probably losing a little bit of faith in Samavati, because she said, "Oh, look, see, they killed them and took them for the Buddha, and they wouldn't do it for you." Okay, and then the next thing she did is when the king was going to stay with, so he would go from one queen to the other, 1 week, one queen, and she was just getting ready to go for 1 week to Samavati, and the Magandia said, "Oh, I had a bad dream last night, let me come with you." And she wouldn't listen to the king when he said no, so she went, and she was looking around. Now what she had done is she had someone put a poisonous snake into the king's guitar or lute, musical instrument, and put some flowers in front of it. And so she came and she pulled the flowers away, and then they all saw this snake come out of the king's musical instrument, and she blamed Samavati. She said, "They want to kill you, look, they've put a poisonous snake in your musical instrument," or something like that. And she said, "See, I told you you wouldn't listen to me." And here the king just had enough, and he got very, very angry, and so he started to believe Magandia, and he called out the Samavati and got them all lined up in a row. This is apparently what he did. He put Samavati in the front and put all of her ladies in waiting behind, and he got a bow with a poison arrow, and he was ready to shoot her. Now Samavati, what she did is she told all of her ladies, she said, "We have no refuge. Let us take the Dhamma as our refuge and bear no ill will towards the king, and think of the king just as yourself." And so they would have had this method of developing loving kindness, first for yourself, then for someone you love, then for someone who's ready to kill you with a bow and arrow. So they were used to this. They would start with themselves, and then they would send loving kindness out to the king. And so the king shot this arrow, actually shot it at Samavati. And I'm trying to understand the Pali, but it says something like, because it basically says he shot the arrow and it turned around. Because of the power of the love, the arrow actually bent back and came to stand right in front of the king's heart, pointed at the king's heart. Something like that. But it's almost as though it shot him through the heart, which it couldn't have done. What it says is, it says as though he was shot through the heart himself, but it must mean it was as though it would shoot him through the heart. And he became very frightened. And he asked Samavati to take refuge, if he could take refuge in Samavati. And Samavati said, "You can't take refuge in me, take refuge in the Buddha." And he said, "Please, please let me take refuge." Samavati said, "No, you must take refuge in the Buddha." So at that point he took refuge, he went to see the Buddha and took refuge in the Buddha, but he said to Samavati, "Please, I grant you one wish." And Samavati said, "Then I have no wish for gold or silver, but I have a wish to see the Buddha." She said, "Give me permission to see the Buddha, to have the Buddha come here regularly and give us teaching so that we may hear the teachings of the Buddha." And Dudena went to the Buddha and asked the Buddha to come, and the Buddha said, it's very difficult for the Buddha to go to one place all the time, but he sent Ananda instead. And Ananda therefore became a favorite among these queens, and actually got a lot of reward from them. As a kind of a side story, Ananda got 500 robes from them. They gave him 500 pieces of cloth to make robes out of. And then the king found out, and the king got very angry and went to see Ananda and said, "So, you heard you got 500 robes?" And he said, "You're going to wear them all?" And Ananda said, "No, I'm not going to wear them all." "Then what are you going to do with 500 robes? What are you doing accepting so many gifts when you know you can't use them?" He said, "Well, I'll give them to those monks who have tattered robes. If a monk has robes with holes in them, then he can replace them with these robes." "Oh, and then what's the monk going to do with his tattered robes? Just throw them away?" And I said, No, they'll take their outer robes and make lower robes with them, because the lower robe's smaller, they can cut it into pieces and make a lower robe. "And then what will they do with their old lower robes?" And Ananda said, "Well, then they'll make bandages to cover for those monks who need bandages or splints or slings. And then what will they do with the bandages they already had?" And he said, "Well, then they will make patches for their robes. And what will they do with their old patches? Well, they'll make threads to sew their robes. And what will they do with the old threads? Well, they'll pound them up with mud and make bricks out of them for making kutis, making huts." And the king was so impressed by this. He said, "That's incredible." He said, I'm sorry, you people really do know the worth of gifts." And he gave Ananda another 500 robes. And the commentary goes on about it, saying that Ananda actually gained thousands and thousands of robes, and he would travel all over India giving away his possession, his acquisition, his gifts. So, side story. But that brings us up to what really happened and why the Buddha told these verses. At this point, Magandhi had had enough, and she knew that now there was no way she could possibly say anything bad about Samavati. She was going to have to take matters into her own hands, which indeed she did. She committed a very terrible, terrible karma. She got her uncle, another Magandhiya, to go to the Samavati's quarters and get rags soaked in oil, wrap them around the pillars, and close all the doors and light the place on fire, with Samavati and her ladies-in-waiting in there. So he started doing this, and Samavati ladies came in and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, we're strengthening the pillars." They would have been wooden pillars. He said, "Yes, you put oil on them and it strengthens them. Now don't stay here, go, because you won't like the smell." And so he sent them off, and they all went into their rooms and closed the doors. Locked all their rooms, and lit everything on fire, and locked the outer door, and went on his way. The monks heard about this and went back to this. Before what happens? No, the monks went back to find the Buddha, to tell the Buddha they heard about this on alms round. saw the palace burning and they heard what happened, went to see the Buddha, and the Buddha said, "Oh, this is the way of samsara." And he said all of these ladies actually, what happened, sorry, I forgot the most important part, is that while they were burning, once they found out what was happening and they found out that the doors were locked, she said to all of the ladies in waiting, she said, "Now we have no refuge except for our practice." And she said, "Do you exert yourself, everyone exert yourselves in practice." And so the commentary says, by exerting themselves on the mindfulness of Vedana, the pain, even as their bodies were burning and the heat was enveloping them, some of them became sotapanna, some of them became sakidagami, some of them became anagami. So this is what the Buddha said. He said, well, they were that they were not negligent. These people were appamāda. They were heedful or vigilant. And so even at the moment of death, being burnt to death, they exerted themselves in the meditation, obviously saying to themselves, pain, pain, and watching their emotions. It's an incredible practice and one that really helps you let go. I mean, this is why in meditation we always say how good it is to look at the pain and how good it is for you to experience these difficulties. If you don't have the difficulties, if it's not unpleasant to you, you'll never let go. So we're looking at this unpleasantness again and again and again until finally the mind gets it that actually this really the whole of this being that we cling to is a cause for suffering and unpleasantness, and so the mind lets go, and it won't come back to have to be born again and again and again. Anyway, this is the idea. Some people like to be born again and again and again, but what you see in the meditation is actually it doesn't come down to being burnt alive. Actually, you can see that the way the body and the mind work, there's really nothing beneficial or wonderful about them at all, and the mind lets go. And so this is what happened with them. And so the Buddha said they got their just deserts. None of them, they all got what they deserved, which is an interesting thing, and we'll see why the Buddha said that actually. And so the king rushed in. He heard about this, and he rushed in trying to put out the fire and found out that he was too late, and they had all been burnt to death. And he was so sad, so grieved, and he thought, who could have done such a horrible deed? And immediately he thought of Magandia. And he thought to himself, well, if I accuse her, she'll never admit it. So he said, he thought of a plan. He said, oh, how wonderful. But when Samavati was still alive, I was always afraid of my life. I never knew what was going to happen. I could never trust her. Now I can sleep well at night. And he said, boy, if only I knew who had done this, I could reward them so highly reward them. I should treat them with great honor for having done this wonderful, having relieved me of this. Now I don't have to think of a way to kill her myself. And Magandia, of course, held up her hand and said, oh, king, it was me who did it all by myself. I thought it up, and gave the orders. You, Magandia? Oh, you're the only one who loves me. He said, come, I want to give you a reward. Bring all of your relatives. And she said, because she had said, with the help of my relatives I did this. Oh, bring all of your relatives, I will give you all a reward. And so everyone heard that Magandia's relatives were going to get a reward. So people who weren't even related to Magandia, they started saying, oh, I'm Magandia's relative. And so, oh, come on. Got them all in. And brought them into the courtyard in front of the king. And the king had them dig big pits up to about waist height. Had them all put into these pits, and the ground covered up, and had the whole courtyard covered in straw, and lit the straw on fire, burning these people to a crisp. And I believe the idea is that they were still alive after that, their skin being, having these terrible burns, but still alive. And then he had the ground with them in it plowed with an iron plow. And that's not the worst of it, because they didn't do that to Magandia. What they did to Magandia herself is tied her up and took a knife and cut pieces of her flesh, roasted them, deep fried them in oil, and had her eat them. This is the cruelty of kings. You have to think Udena is not such a good guy himself. This is the story of Samavati and Magandia. So then the monks started asking these questions amongst themselves. They said, I wonder where these, what can you say about these two? Can you really consider that Samavati is dead? Magandhya, is she the one that's dead? Which of these would we consider to be dead? It was kind of a philosophical talk. And the Buddha asked, well, what are you talking about? They told him. And the Buddha said, this is where he said these verses. And this is where the context would it. So, who is really dead? And the Buddha said, appamādo, heedfulness, is the path to immortality. Pamādo maccuno padaṁ. Those who are negligent and of course evil go to death. And he said, appamattā mīyanti, the heedful, people like Samavati, never die. Ye pamattā yathā matā, but the heedless are as if already dead. And so on. Now the monks asked what had happened to Magandhya. I guess we can tell this part. Or what had happened to Samavati. He said, well, how did Samavati really deserve what had happened to her? And the Buddha said, well, if you look at just this life, it doesn't look like she deserved it at all. But what happened is, way back in the past, she and her ladies had I think they had been queen. She had been a queen, and these were her ladies in waiting at the time. And they wanted to make a fire for the king. And they wanted to set this grass on fire or something. They saw this grass, and they wanted to clear it or something, and so they lit it all on fire. Turns out there was a Pacceka Buddha, an enlightened being, sitting in the middle of the grass, sitting in a high meditative attainment state, a state of high meditation, anyway. High state of meditation, meditative attainment. And so they were afraid. They thought he must have died as a result. And it turns out they knew this guy. This Buddha was supported by the king, and the king was always giving him food. So they knew the king would be very, very angry at them if he found out that they had burnt this guy. And they said, "Oh, we have to get rid of him." They saw, "Oh, he's still there. He must have died." Truth is, when you're in these states, even fire can't hurt you. This is what they said. So he wasn't dead. He was actually perfectly fine. And so they said, "Let's get rid of him." And so they put wood all around him and piled wood up all on top of him and lit him on fire again and went away, thinking, now he'll burn to a crisp. Turns out he didn't burn to a crisp. 7 days later, he got up, and of course the fire was totally gone. And he got up and looked around. Oh, what happened? And went on his way. But as a result of that, as a result of the evil, see, the first time they had no evil in their minds, but the second time they did a very evil deed to burn this Buddha, and as a result, so it says, they were burnt in this life, because it weighed heavily on their mind, the guilt that was in their minds. Even though they actually didn't kill the guy, but they had bad intentions, so it says. Okay, this is the story, and apologies, it's actually much longer than that even, but that's quite long enough. The important thing is, this is the beginning of the appamāda, which is the most important teaching of the Buddha. As it says here in the commentary, what do we say of appamāda in the Samyutta Nikaya? The Buddha says this. He says, just like all of the footprints of all animals that exist, that walk on land, can fit inside the footprint of the elephant, in the same way all of the teachings of the Buddha fit inside this teaching on appamāda. This is how important the Buddha took this teaching to be. This is also the last words of the Buddha, appamādena sampadita. Develop yourselves, or perfect yourselves, become full of heedfulness. So what does it mean to say that someone who is heedful doesn't die? Basically, well, we're looking again at the idea of death. And really the truth is that death itself is only a concept. But if we're looking at absolute death or ultimate sense, death is this momentary birth and death of our experience. When you experience seeing or hearing or smelling or tasting or feeling or thinking, that's birth. And when the experience ceases, that's death. So we're experiencing constant death and birth in every moment. So someone who is heedful is able to overcome this and is able to enter into Nirvana, which is free from arising and therefore free from ceasing. That's what that means. What does it mean to say that a person who is heedless is as though one who is already dead? I think this is much more. This is how you can say a person who is heedful dies, because on the one hand they have to be born and die again and again and again, and they'll have to keep coming back, being born again, sometimes in hell, sometimes in heaven, but always subject to more and more based on their clinging and their craving, and lots of stress and lots of, even in heaven beings have stress. They worry about dying still. When they come to the end of their term, they might go back to the human world and eventually back to hell. But the most important part of this teaching is that one who is negligent, it doesn't matter whether they're born or die, they're as if already dead. And so this is what you should see in the meditation, that actually it's a part of being born, or a part of waking up. And you really feel like this. Like before I started practicing meditation, I was alive, but really it's only a name. It wasn't as though I was alive really at all. It was more as though I was dead or asleep, sleepwalking. When you come to meditate, you wake up to so much, and you're able to see clearly what's going on. You're able to see clearly your habits and your reactions and how you've built these up just out of the darkness of ignorance that you've carried with you. This is why we get angry, this is why we get greedy, this is why we are conceited and arrogant and attached to so many things, why we are judgmental, why we are partial. All of this comes from our negligence, our laziness, really, in doing our duty, in not applying ourselves to our experience, not being careful. Another way of translating this is carefulness and carelessness. Simply by not being careful, not being thorough when we do something, even when we're eating, right? When we eat food, every moment we're giving rise to craving, and maybe we don't like this food, so we're giving rise to aversion, and we're feeding this partiality. And simply because of going by our old habits and going by ignorance and delusion and thinking that this is the way to find happiness and peace. When we come to meditate, you can see this. You can see your attachments, you can see your aversions, and you realize that they've just been cultivated. We've just been growing these like weeds in a garden, or like fungus in the dark. And once you shine the sun in, all of the fungus, all of the rot dries up and fades away. A person who is negligent, it doesn't matter what they do or who they are, but they will always be leading themselves to more suffering, because they're like a person flailing around in the dark. Their life has no meaning, so therefore they're as if one who is already dead. So seeing this difference, when you come to practice meditation and you see the difference between the two, you set yourself, and automatically the mind begins to change. Once you see things clearly and you apply yourselves to see things as they are, the mind can never go back to that. It sees something it's never seen before, and this is the suffering that follows necessarily from craving, from evil. So it will never go back and give rise to craving or partiality again. These wise ones set themselves in heedfulness or carefulness, and they delight in it, they rejoice in it, and this is what you gain from the meditation. It may not feel like it in the middle because you're suffering from all of this bad stuff, but once you come out of it, it's such a joy, and you have this great peace and happiness in your life, feeling very viscerally this freedom, like an open space that you've gained, whereas before it was like you were suffocating. And you feel this great weight lifted off, so you rejoice in it. And you dwell in the resort of the noble ones, and because the resort of the noble ones is to be mindful all the time. So how do you do it? Jhāyino sātatikā. You do it by meditating constantly. Sātatikā means incessantly or continuously. So the idea is not to just do, now I'll do meditation and then stop and then meditation. It's to be mindful all the time, even here when we're sitting, even when you're walking, when you're eating the food, to try to be mindful in everything you do, and to take it as a meditation. Niccaṁ daḻhaparakkamā. This means setting up your effort. Niccaṁ, which means the opposite of aniccaṁ. Niccaṁ means permanently, really. To be permanently set in your effort. So it means that you never give up your effort, never give up your working to get rid of the evil things inside, to develop good things, and to protect yourself from giving rise to evil, and to protect the good things inside. Phusanti dhīrā nibbānaṁ. These wise ones touch nibbana. How this happens, through exerting yourself and continuously practicing meditation, you start to see things clearly. You start to see the connections and the relations, but more importantly, you see the suffering, and you see that all of this being and this experience that we have is meaningless, is useless. The attraction you had, thinking this will bring me happiness, that will bring me happiness, is delusion. And you start to see that actually it's only bringing more and more attachment, more and more addiction, and more suffering. The mind changes, and the mind begins to look at these things as boring. This is where you get to the point where it seems like everything is the same. Same old. You really don't want to look at them anymore. And you keep looking and looking until finally the mind gets it and says, I want to be free from this. It gives rise to the desire to be free. Some people run away as a result, thinking, well, then I'll go back home and I won't have to deal with this. But of course, if you go home, you take it all with you. So they don't generally actually want to go home, but they're desperate. And the mind is really looking for a way out. And that's really important, because as you apply yourself again and again, eventually the mind will just have had enough. When it becomes unbearable, that's when the mind will let go. The mind will refuse to bear it anymore, refuse to go out, refuse to cling again. I'm going to cling again, and it's good. And then you hurt yourself again and again until finally the mind says, no, I'm not going to cling. And that's Nibbana. The mind, it doesn't mean you just sit there, but it means actually the mind goes out. No more seeing, no more hearing, goes in actually. No more coming out to see, hear, smell, taste, feel, or think. The mind becomes free. That is called touching Nibbana, which is the supreme yoga kemang anuttarang, which is the supreme freedom from bondage. It's because we're only bound to suffering because of our attachment. Once you don't attach, once the mind is truly unattached, it will not even go out to the suffering again. And it will constantly come back inside until finally this life is gone, and for the arahant, the mind gives rise to no further becoming, and there is no more birth, and therefore no more aging, sickness, or death. So this is the meaning of these 3 verses and the rather long story that goes with them. So that's the teaching for today. And I think the application to our practice is quite relevant. The Buddha was very clear that this is the important thing to take in our practice, is to be careful. So we should constantly be bringing ourselves back. As my teacher, he gave an example of a person who's rocking a cradle. They have to constantly rock the cradle just carefully, so as not to wake the baby. In the same way, you have to, with your practice, you have to keep constant watch, and to do it smoothly, so that your practice never gets broken off course, or you'll wake the baby, or your practice will fall off course. So a person who's practicing meditation should do it as though they're rocking a baby's cradle, careful, or as the Buddha said, as though carrying a pot full of oil. The story of this man the Buddha told the story of a man who was carrying a pot of oil, and he said, I want you to carry this pot of oil full to the brim through the whole city during a festival. There was a festival and all these dancing and games and so on. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a man walk behind you with a sword. And if you spill 1 drop of that oil, we're going to cut your head off. And the Buddha said, now suppose there was such a man, and suppose such a thing happened. Now do you think he would be distracted by the dancing, by the singing, by the games and the sports? And the monk said, no, probably he wouldn't. And the Buddha said, then you should take this simile to heart, and you should act like that, and be constantly vigilant. Now, this is what is meant by this. So this is an element of our practice, the key element. The other reason why it's the key element is because it's a synonym for mindfulness. The Buddha said, sadā-sato, the person who is constantly, always mindful. That is what is meant by appamāda. So our practice of mindfulness, where we know things as they are, where we're clearly aware, when a thought comes up, we know it as thinking, when pain comes up, we know it as pain, not letting our mind extrapolate on it and proliferate and make more of it than it is, simply seeing it for what it is, until the point that our mind settles in this, changes its behavior, seeing the difference between going out and clinging and just simply knowing it for what it is, and it starts to rejoice and feel such great peace and freedom in just seeing things as they are. So, this is the teaching, and hopefully a good explanation of how it relates to our practice. So, thanks for listening, and now back to our meditation.